So Panasonic have just released their latest firmware updates for their flagship G series cameras and also the S1 and S1R models. I'm interested in the G series updates because those are the cameras that I own, so this video is going to be all about the G series. Specifically, the GH5 now goes to version 2.6, the GH5S now goes to version 1.4, and the G9 now goes to version 2. But in addition to that, this camera now has the ability, like the GH5 before it, to receive the VLOG picture profile. Now, you can't install VLOG on an earlier version of firmware, so don't try. But after the firmware, you can install VLOG. That is unfortunately a paid upgrade, just as it was on the GH5. It costs £80, but with it you also get a waveform monitor. So for me personally, I did think it was worthwhile picking up an upgrade code to receive the VLOG picture profile, which means I also get the waveform monitor. Before I go into a comparison between these three cameras, I'm actually going to do a quick tutorial on how you install or activate VLOG on the G9 with this new firmware. So if you're not interested in that, feel free to skip forward a couple of minutes, but if you are, then let's roll the tutorial. So the first thing you need to do is format your SD card in the camera. Then go to the second wrench menu in the camera's settings. Scroll down to the Activate option and select it. Now select the option labelled Export Serial Code. Once that's done, remove the SD card and return it to your computer. Now grab your VLOG activation code box and retrieve the black sleeve inside. Open that and you'll find a card with the activation code on it. Don't lose this, as you may need it again in future if you have to send your camera for repair. Now go to the activation page on Panasonic's website. The link to this is in the instruction manual that also came in the box. But if you're anything like me, you probably don't read instruction manuals, so I'll put a link to it in the description below. On this page, select the product code DMW-SFU1. That'll take you to a page where you can upload the serial code that your camera placed on the SD card. Note the location of this file, but don't change it. Once you've uploaded the serial code, the website will ask you to enter the activation code that's printed on the card you got inside the black sleeve. Be careful when you enter the code here and don't enter the dash between the banks of 4 letters and numbers, otherwise it won't work. Do that. Then the website will want to place a new code on the SD card. Make sure this goes into the same folder where the serial code was placed. Now you can return the SD card to the camera, go to the Activate menu settings again, but this time select Import Activation Code, and then you're done. Okay, so how do the GH5, GH5S and the G9, all with their respective new firmwares loaded onto them, how do they compare now? Let's take a look. I just want to briefly talk about the features that Panasonic have added into each of them. And specifically to do with the G9, they've added a lot to this camera. So they've added 4K, 25 and 30 frames per second recording at 10-bit. They've also activated the 10-bit output on the HDMI, so you can now record to an external recorder at 10-bit at up to 60 frames per second. Again, that's very significant. They've added animal eye detection, which the GH5S also gets. Sadly, the GH5 doesn't. And generally they say that they've improved the autofocus capability of all of these three cameras. Now, they always say that, so the first thing I want to do is test to see how the autofocus performs in video. Is it still that kind of stuttery mess that you get with contrast detect autofocus, or have they finally ironed out some of the chinks in the DFD technology that they use? So I'm just going to do a quick, very simple test, seeing how well the cameras rack between near and far focus. So I'm going to be switching between my tripod bag here and the distance. So let's see how the G9 performs with that. Now the G9 does this really, really well. Look at that. That's almost dual pixel autofocus standard. Really, really good. Let's try the GH5S. The sun has gone in a little bit, so exposure's not quite the same. That is awesome. GH5S seems to be doing just as well. And now it's the turn of the GH5. Yeah. So I'm now going to check each camera's ability to track an object. I'm going to use my camera lens cap there. So I'm going to start with the GH5. So out we go. It's a bit slow. It got it. Then back out. Yeah, it's doing it. It's just a little bit slow. Very slow, in fact. It got there in the end. Okay, let's try the GH5S. So it's doing it, it's just taking its sweet time. Yeah, not convinced that's actually any better than it was before. Might even be a little bit worse. So this is the G9. You see what I mean about the G9? That's pretty good. I know you can do it. There we go. So I've just come back inside because A, it was really, really cold, but B, I want to comment on what you've just seen with regards to the autofocus. Every time Panasonic release a firmware update, everybody's looking to see, has the autofocus improved? Is it now usable? Blah, 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 blah. Well, even with these updates, the tracking performance in particular is still unusable. It's not fast enough, it's not reliable enough. If you're trying to track someone walking down an aisle in a wedding, it's not going to get them. If you're tracking somebody on a bike, it's not going to get them. However, as you saw in that clip, if you are transitioning from one point to another, the transitions now are actually pretty smooth on all three models. I still think the G9 performs the best, but even the GH5 now looks remarkably smooth. It doesn't do that kind of twitching as much at either end of the transition. So they are much, much better performers, but still, in my view, not good enough for certain applications. There's a few things that I didn't mention whilst I was outside specifically to do with the G9, so I'll just quickly go over those. And that's that, first of all, it has the variable frame rate option. So if you're into doing time-lapse movies in camera, then that option is actually really handy, and I do use that feature quite a lot. The other thing is the VLOG option. I think I've seen a couple of people ask, does the G9 have the ability to load custom LUTs? And the answer is, yes it does. Just like the GH5 and GH5S, it has the View Assist option, and you can use the pre-installed VLOGL to Rec 709 LUT, or you can install one of your own. There are so many new features with this new firmware that I'd be here all day if I listed them all, and I'm sure I've probably missed one or two major ones as it is. I do remember there's one that I've not mentioned, and that's the autofocus limiter that you'll get on the GH5S and the G9. That's where you can tell the camera to restrict the distance at which the autofocus operates within. So perhaps if you're shooting through a fence to something in the background, it's not going to jump to focus on the fence, but I haven't actually tested that yet. If you have any questions about the new firmware, please put them in the comments down below and I'll try to answer them. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel and give me a thumbs up if you liked what you saw today. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.